Hello and welcome to this video on indirect taxes. We are first just going to do a quick bit of recap though. Can you describe 3 types of market failure? Pause the video now and have a go. So we've got our 3 market failures here. So externalities, the market equilibrium, the P1Q1 does not take into consideration the impact on third parties not involved in that transaction. We've got public goods, which are not provided for by free markets or by private firms because they are not profitable due to the free rider problem, and information gaps where the market equilibrium does not take into consideration the difference between the knowledge of the buyer and the knowledge of the seller, where one might have more knowledge than the other, which effectively means they're going to get a bad deal. So really important that we know those. The next string of videos is how to correct those and make markets more socially optimum. So that's what the next string of videos are going to be about. So we're going to start that string with indirect taxes. So this is going to be one of many different government interventions or methods of government interventions that can be used to move the market towards where we want to go. So if we think there is a more socially optimum equilibrium, how do we move the market there? Because as we've been through in previous videos, producers are selfish, consumers are selfish, or they're both unaware of the third party impacts or information gaps or anything along those lines. So we need to figure out a way to make sure or try and move the market towards where we think it needs to be. That comes with downsides as well. So we're going to go through for each of these the good things, why it can be good to use it, but the limitations, and they're going to be really important for your long answer questions. So when it comes to using an indirect tax, we are going to be using these for demerit goods. These are the goods that are socially undesirable. They cause you to be more unhealthy, more polluting, whatever it might be. And there's lots of different impacts of that, which we've been through when we went through this in more detail. So we're just going to focus on indirect taxes from a improving the market standpoint in this video. I'm going to try and keep this as short and sweet as I can. So let's go through it. So let's look at the function of the indirect tax from a government intervention standpoint. So an indirect tax will increase the cost of production for whatever good or service we're talking about. That will shift supply to the left, creating an S plus tax supply curve, and the distance between the two curves there from here to here is the size of the indirect tax. That forces up the price of this good or service, which will decrease the quantity demanded, which is the key factor here. Because if this is cigarettes or if this is any good or service with a negative externality, we want this to happen here, and that will move the market towards a more socially optimum equilibrium. Whatever good or service it is, we can apply a tax to it if it's having a negative impact on society to achieve this. Okay, that's the goal. All right, so lots of situations where this will be a chain of reasoning that you could use. Obviously up here, we can talk about the specific good that it is, the specific firm that it is, and we can add more application in this section here, which will bulk up what we're talking about. So it sounds like a really impressive paragraph. But the gist of it, the bare bones are here. So we go from there to there, to there, to there, to there. If you can string that together and apply it to a specific good or service or a specific market, that's all you need to do. All right, so that is what we need to be able to explain. If we take the diagram and we compare it to a diagram we looked at in the past, which is the negative production externality diagram, you can see they are exactly the same thing. So if you have a good or service that is causing a negative production externality, then an indirect tax is a perfect solution to that if you're looking for a method of government intervention to fix it. And even though this comparison here doesn't directly apply, it still does the same job down here. So if it's a cigarettes or something like that, where it's a consumption externality, we can still achieve this by using an indirect tax. So there will still be the opportunity to use this intervention for a negative consumption externality also. Just to remind you, an indirect tax can be specific or it may be ad valorem. So a specific tax is where a tax is a fixed amount per unit. So let's take a bottle of wine. It's £1 per bottle of wine. It doesn't matter how much that wine is worth. It's £1 per bottle. So it doesn't matter how expensive the bottle of wine is. The tax is always £1. So you've got this parallel curve here. Okay, parallel shift. Whereas an ad valorem tax is a percentage per unit. So if we said it was 5% per bottle of wine, as the bottle of wine gets more expensive, the tax gets bigger. And you can see that with the skewed shift here. If it's a section A, they may ask you to illustrate this or this, and you're going to have to be able to do the right one. If it's an open-ended section B or C, then you're going to get to be able to pick. You can do either one. If you're more comfortable with this, great, use that. But if you can slide in there that that's a specific tax and you can explain a bit about how that works, it's just going to add some value to your answer. So just keep that in mind. Now, if you're going to use this in a long answer situation, you're going to use an indirect tax and explain how it's going to work. You will always need to provide a counterbalance to explain a situation where it may not work due to this other variable that might have taken place. So everything we've been through before, set par, that will work. However, it depends on some other factor. So one good one for this one that I'd really recommend using is price elasticity. If a good or service is price inelastic, consumers are willing and able to purchase it at higher prices because of various factors, then the indirect tax is going to be less effective, because you can draw a new diagram alongside your counterbalance that will look like this one with our more inelastic demand curve. Okay, and when we apply the tax, it's going to change the impact of that tax, because consumers will be happier to pay higher prices for this good or service. So while the price will get forced up, the quantity demanded will not fall by much, and the tax will be less effective. So if you compared this side by side with the first diagram that we had, this distance is much bigger, whereas now it's come much smaller because of the inelastic demand curve. So let's take a few examples. Let's say we're talking about fast food. If we apply a higher tax to fast food, okay, that's going to force the price up. But fast food is addictive, it's convenient, and it's not a massive proportion of a working adult's income. So they may be happier to accept higher prices, and you won't see that many people no longer purchasing fast food. So people will still eat fast food at the new higher prices. So if that's our goal, to reduce the consumption of fast food, it hasn't been as affected because it's addictive, a small proportion of your income, it's convenient in this case. So we can use those other factors listed here to explain why this tax will not work. So you'll say, yes, it will, here's why. On the other hand, maybe it won't. All right, and that's the sort of structure that we'll build towards, that you'll see when I start going through exam questions and showing you what they're supposed to look like. So this is a really good counterbalance that I'd highly recommend. Another counterbalance could be that an indirect tax might send prices too high. And that can lead to informal markets, which is where people buy those goods illegally and sell them illegally off the record. Okay, so we call these informal markets. They might be black markets. Lots of ways to key term this idea. So imagine people, they are in duty free, they buy cigarettes in bulk, and then they sell them to their mates off the record for cash, maybe. So away from the tax person. All right, or they go to France, buy goods in bulk, bring them back over, sell them at markets or wherever it might be. A good example of this is like, it's not necessarily due to taxes, but the price of watching sports got really expensive, so people turned to Fire Sticks as an informal market to watch those channels. Similar concept, but if it's forced by the government through a tax, it can create these situations. Or we can debate the government's ability to actually set a tax that's effective. If the government does not have the information to set the tax at the right amount, they may set it too low and it's not effective. Not that many people stop buying the good. Too high and they create those informal markets. Ignore my dodgy animations down here there. But that's the sort of another third counterbalance that we could use that sort of incorporates one of the other ones, but good one to think of. So to summarize the indirect tax, we want certain goods or services to be consumed or produced in lower amounts. So we set the indirect tax and that will increase costs of production for that firm. That then gets forced onto the consumer in the form of higher prices. And that will mean the production or consumption will be reduced for a demerit good, which is good for society to have that consumed or produced in lower amounts. However, if consumers are price inelastic, they may still purchase the good anyway, and it will lessen the impact of the tax. And by setting a tax, you might create an informal market where people buy these goods illegally, sell them illegally, away from shops and your regular ways of purchasing it, so people avoid paying the higher prices. Okay, so good way to think about it. Good method of government intervention to use, easy to use in lots of situations too. So make sure we've got a good grasp of this one. Thank you, and the next one is on subsidies.